Welcome, everybody, to the Tag Your It podcast. I'm Ray Ray.
And I'm David Van Bepper.
And we've got a special guest again with us in the studio. Who are you, man?
This is Doug Shivers, pastor of Boulevard Baptist Church in Springfield, Missouri.
Yes, so he's a three-timer. As far as I remember, this is the third time
that he's been on the program.
And it'd be awesome to have him every time, and just let him have the Tag Your It podcast,
That I ever get a second invite is always intriguing to me. So
yeah, a third one even.
And the third, I'm not sure what to do with that. I don't have a category.
Well, your first program was still like one of our most viewed programs and all. I don't think that it's actually on YouTube because it was before we were doing YouTube and just doing Facebook Live. But on Facebook Live, I want to say that it's in the top 3, probably. So, and that was like 2018, summer of 2018, if I remember right.
Yeah.
So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was whenever I was in my basement and we had it kind of over.
Yes.
And so things have, changed drastically in 3 moves. And a little bit more space and a little bit cleaner in the background and sound and all that stuff. But yeah, so people have hung out and supported us through all of our messes and all that kind of stuff. So it's been really awesome being on the 5th season and stuff, and having you yet again, and especially whenever I think the last time that we had a conversation with you was at the Missouri Baptist
annual meeting in Bolivar in 2019.
Was it Bolivar?
Branson.
Yeah, Branson.
Yeah.
Bees.
See, I make mistakes.
There's a lot of bees. Bolivar, Buffalo, Branson. There's a lot of bees around here.
There are.
So we had a conversation about kind of the state of the Missouri Baptist Convention. And so we wanted to bring you on about the big old convention. So we didn't have a big Southern Baptist annual meeting last year because of all the mess with COVID and all that fun stuff. So this is a big one, isn't it?
It very well could be. The estimate I've seen may be as many as 15,000 messengers.
Yeah. And there's going to be a lot of visitors there too. So.
Oh yeah, and that's of course the largest one was Dallas in '85 with 45 or 46,000.
Were you there?
I was.
Man,
sweet!
Yeah.
Wow.
Did you have any memorabilia you can wear? No.
85 Southern Baptist annual meeting survivor.
There was no memorabilia, but it was a fascinating event. If you're just looking back at some of the history, my first one to attend was in 1984. I went to the Kansas City convention where elected Charles Stanley. And then we lived through a year of raging, shouting, jumping up and down, lots of newsletters, which was then, of course, the equivalent of today's social media, which is not really equivalent, but a lot of mimeograph stuff, a lot of stuff coming in the mail, a lot of offset printing things that were done, and a variety of meetings. So we arrive in Dallas, and I drove. It was honestly one of the strangest things to ever behold. Whenever they opened up the convention center and we got there, what you did is you sent one of your group early, like at 7 a.m., stand outside the doors so that when they finally opened the doors at, say, 8:30 or 9, you had to race the little old ladies for the best seats in the auditorium. The WMU ladies, who will knock you down and run over you on their way to get a seat. And so saved a group of seats. The rest of us showed up, and we didn't leave that place all day or all evening.
Oh, wow.
2 of us would go out, and it was funny, there was a McDonald's just off the parking lot. And I've never been to a McDonald's where all the lines extended outside the building and wrapped around the McDonald's. There was that many people trying to get food. And so one of us went in, 2 of us actually bought food for our group of about 8, hiked back to the center, sat there and ate, and observed all the festivities, as it were.
Yeah. Wow.
See, I'm a little concerned about the parking in Nashville. It's been a little while. It's been like 10 years plus since I've been to Nashville, and I've never been to the music center. So I've looked at some of the parking, and I'm gonna leave on Sunday night, and right out Sunday afternoon, right after church, get down there in a cheap motel for that first night, and then the next few nights, Midwest Christian Outreach is paying for me to be there. So I get to go. I wouldn't have gone otherwise. I had no plan, and I just get a phone call from. We've had a guy on a few times, Don Vino, who is the director of Midwest Christian Outreach, and he said, "Hey, you want to go to the Southern Baptist annual meeting?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "Okay, you can stay in my hotel room with me." And I was like, "Man,
nice.
Perfect." I said, "Well, let me see if with my wife if we're okay to do the gas and to do the meals." And so she's like, "Yeah, it'll be about $250 maybe, give or take, if you eat out every meal, however you're going to do it." And I was like, "All right." So before I could even call him back, he's like, "Oh, tell us how much it'll be and we'll write you a check."
Oh,
and
well, that's
yeah, they underwrote the whole thing. They even gave me more than what I asked for. So God was really good to be able to get me there.
Yeah.
The small church I pastored there in Oklahoma had a budget for convention and conference. And so I was connected enough in that day that I knew the guys who knew the guys to get in the convention motel.
Ooh, whoa.
And so I was always within walking distance of the convention. So that was nice. And, it was, at that time, there weren't any other conferences I really went to. And so that would be, I was just looking back. I went 84, 5, 6, and 7. I went those 4 years together. And I've been maybe once or twice since, only because it was nearby.
Yeah. So let me do something. We really didn't have this in our outline, but I kind of want to make sure that I track this. So you were at the largest Southern Baptist annual meeting ever in Dallas, 1985. Yeah. You went to the one in Kansas City, and then you go down to Dallas. So what was it that made it such a big deal then? And then kind of maybe you can parallel that a little bit with what's going on, here in the current SBC track of things.
Right. Well, what you'd had was when the conservatives finally figured out what they had to do to actually change the direction of the convention. The controversy had been going on since the 60s. The whole issue over Eliot's book on Genesis, and then the Broadman Bible commentary that included a fellow writing on Genesis as myth and legend, really stirred folks up. And then Criswell, Dr. W.A. Criswell from First Baptist Dallas, I believe it was in 1970, preached a sermon at the pastor's conference or convention. I'm not sure about that now. Why I preach the Bible is literally true, which was booed, honestly, if what I understand, by several of the more moderate and liberal members of the convention. And the conservatives knew how to throw a fit, and they knew how to get a committee, but they had no idea how to actually affect the outcomes. So somebody finally read the Constitution and bylaws and figured out, well, we need to elect the president, and then the president, in his power to elect the committee on committees and committee on boards, make sure he's got the right people, because those are the ones who then go about getting the trustees for organizations. Well, it began, 79, 80, along in there, and the conservatives kept winning. They were well networked. They knew how to get word out. Whenever Stanley won in 84, it was like the moderate faction realized they had to really push to make a change if they were going to derail this thing. So that's what happened in 85. Now, I've never confirmed any of this, but the rumors were right about busloads of people and seminary students being sent as messengers and their way being paid to get them there. Whether any of that is true or not, who knows?
Yeah.
But they did not expect 45,000 messengers.
Wow.
I think they got 30,000 of us in the main hall, and then the other 15 had to work on closed circuit television in another room, which that also made the votes kind of intriguing because they'd count the main room or get an idea, and then they'd have to get a report from the extra areas and the spillover rooms. So everything was slowed. But this was the place where, if you will, the moderates made, I think, in a sense, really their last stand. It was the attempt to stop what they saw. They called it the fundamentalist takeover. And that was, I think, inappropriate. I mean, compared to them, sure, fundamentalist. Yeah. Compared to historic Christianity, conservative.
Yeah.
Primarily what was going on.
Yeah, it depends on, what you're, because that's a very relative term and it's still getting tossed around pretty relative. So it depends on, like you're saying, where you're viewing it from. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this was the convention where there was an attempt to offer a substitute slate of nominees for offices, boards, agencies, kinds of things. And the chair wasn't prepared for that challenge, or didn't seem to be, and said, we'll have to talk to our parliamentarian. And they came back the next session and ruled it out of order, that they could not en masse substitute a whole slate, that if they wanted to do substitutions, they had to do it one person at a time. In other words, you could not challenge the whole group. You had to challenge individual nominees. Oh my, the pandemonium that ensued. Shouts of point of order and point of privilege, and of course, all that ruled out of order. And then a lay couple who had been behind some of this, one long after that, they went to court to sue the convention that they had made the wrong call and it disenfranchised them. Of course, they ultimately lost because the courts didn't want to get involved in an internecine battle within the convention. But yeah, and I still remember, I think it might have been Cecil Sherman. I was near enough a microphone he was standing at. Cecil has gone on to be with the Lord now, but either he or another stood and said something like, as we oppose totalitarianism in the regimes in the Middle East, so we oppose totalitarianism on the platform of the Southern Baptist Convention. And they ruled him out of order and shut off his mic. And it was quite the day. And then whenever it happened again in Atlanta, that they couldn't turn things around, I think at that point they knew the handwriting was on the wall.
Well, that's an interesting thing because it causes me to then kind of move into one of our questions that we had put on there. And sorry we didn't do all the background on where you were, but then I'm glad to just jump right into it. Are we in uncharted territory? I mean, I hear people saying this is the end of the SBC. This is game over. I've heard, like you've said, the liberals have taken over. It just seems very, very. There's a lot of hostility. If you get on any SBC type of group, there's this massive amount of hostility, and I say that it goes on from either side. I mean, if you look at just what has happened here in the last few days regarding Dr. Moore and Mike Stone, is this something that has never happened before? Where are we?
I wouldn't say it has never happened before. Well, let's clarify. It's never happened when we've had social media.
Gotcha.
In the day of the conservative resurgence in the 80s, like I said, we were using newsletters and mailing lists. You had to sign up to get the information, or you had to make the effort to go to a live event. Now, I was committed enough at that time over the issue of inerrancy. I asked and was kind of stunned, but Paige Patterson actually came to my little church in Ponca City, Oklahoma, to speak about it. And I hosted a thing for the local pastors in our association. So there was a lot of travel on the part of guys like Pressler and Patterson and company, trying to explain what was going on and why it was such a big deal. As far as whether this is uncharted waters, I guess the element that I think is a bit new is there does seem to be a bit of a angry, and I use the term capital F fundamentalist mindset that is demanding things that I'm not sure can be demanded and our conventions survive. Baptist faith and message was always meant to be the parameters doctrinally.
Yeah.
And it's, if you read the document, even the 2000, it is to me what I'd call a pretty big tent conservative Baptistic confession. A lot of room under it. But what seems to get muddled to me is we seem to be mixing up theological conviction with secular political positions.
Yes, yes.
And like it or not, the Southern Baptist Convention is being identified, I think, in a big part of Christendom, and certainly the secular world, as the religious arm of the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And even to an extent, the Trump version of the Republican Party. And that kind of connection is to me a bit troubling. And I'm not saying that your faith doesn't impact how you vote, how you think, but there ought to be a little bit of room here for some disagreements about political things.
Yeah.
And that is an issue. I think the uncharted water that we're dealing with in terms of critical theory and its impacts. Now, the big deal right now is, of course, the infamous resolution number 9.
Yes.
From 2019. And if you read the resolution itself is, to me, somewhat innocuous.
I'd agree.
I read it and I go, okay. Maybe not the way I'd have worded it, but not a huge deal. Except they don't accurately note the origins.
Yes.
Now, I think a lot of this energy could have been diffused had they received Tom Askell's amendment as a friendly amendment and made it part of the resolution. If they had done that, a lot of the heat, I think, would have dropped out of this. But for whatever reasons, they decided not to do that. Now, I do understand. Here's a resolutions team, and I don't know how big that resolutions committee is. I don't recall off the top of my head. But they're being obligated in the space of, say, less than 24 hours to sort through a whole, laundry list of resolutions.
Yeah.
And to come up with something they think the whole convention can support. So I get that that's hard. And I have some sympathy for that. But as I actually watched the video, the recording of what happened.
Yeah.
And I'm just sitting here shaking my head that, guys, you stepped in it right there.
Oh, yeah.
If you'd have simply included what Tom noted, because what Tom brought forward was accurate, you might have saved yourself a lot of grief.
Yeah.
I do think that critical theory, this wedding of Marxism and postmodern deconstruction is impacting our society, has been for decades, and we just didn't recognize it. Now, it's funny to me now, a little sad and a little humorous. I've been going back and reading Francis Schaeffer again.
Oh.
The first 3. The God who's there, escape from reason, he's there and he's not silent.
Yeah.
And suddenly, things that in my 20s that I read, because I had no experience with postmodernism, now all suddenly make all sorts of sense. Because Schaeffer was seeing this in its nascent forms in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
In fact, this quote stood out to me. I wrote this down. He writes this in 1972. I think science is going to die. I think its death is coming. I think it's going to be reduced to 2 things: mere technology and another form of sociological manipulation. I do not believe for a moment that science is going to be able to continue with its objectivity once the base that brought forth has totally been destroyed.
Yeah.
So you are dealing with worldview things that we weren't necessarily in the 80s. So I guess in some ways it's unique. I just also think there's just a lot of heat and not a great deal of light.
I like that a lot. It causes me to think just a little bit. I have read, I think, all three of those Schaeffer books, and it's been a few years since I went through them, talking maybe 3 years, so not all that long ago. But I always don't remember as well as I'd like. Adam can tell you that I can read a book and be like, oh, well, I don't remember everything. That's why I have to highlight and go, because otherwise I'm like, oh, I know that book says something about that. It makes me think a little bit about Kuhn, right, and structures of scientific revolutions. I mean, that falls right in line with what he says there, and we've seen that. And I think your beautiful picture of that is that statement, evangelicals don't believe in science, and wait a second, your definition of science has moved so much.
Exactly.
Of course we don't believe in your science.
Yeah, and I think what sums it up, though, I think, just if you're speaking about Schaeffer, is the other one, the Christian Manifesto, starting out from the gate, and I think it's something that can be not just, he's speaking to Christians at the very beginning there, and in the whole book or whatever, but I think it can be even more broad, but he's talking about how we view things in parts and pieces and not totals. So he's looking at that. And that's the big deal is, say, Resolution 9 here. They're looking at the parts and pieces and they're going, okay, so here comes the analytical tool. It's a tool. Right. And it's like, wait, no. And then what Tom Askell is going, but there's a worldview. There's a total. Yes. And here's what Francis Schaeffer has been saying and dealing with for this long time. And I mean, it does come from Van Til and that view and the Kuyperian, like just all that stuff that came out of the Dutch reformers and their theology, and just putting totals together, systems together, and explaining that Christianity is a unit and not just parts and pieces that we subscribe to arbitrarily.
That thing that gets missed here is critical theory. And that doesn't matter whether you're talking, all the things of colonial theory, race theory, gender theory, queer theory, fat theory, ableist theory, all those things all come out of the same mindset. Mm-hmm. They all and they're all totalizing worldviews. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not going to be so. I think it'd be over the top for me to say there's nothing to be learned here. But you better learn it from a Christian worldview so you recognize what's truth and what isn't. Yeah. What may be a legitimate observation, possibly even some elements of help in the path forward. The other thing that I think happens, though, guys, is if you look at like the black churches and ministers who have distanced themselves because of what the convention presidents, the seminary presidents, saying CRT does not work with the confession, the Baptist Faith and Message. Yeah. I think one of the things I'm hearing, and I think this is true, a lot of the folks that are espousing these things do not see them in terms of total worldviews. Yeah. They have heard bits and pieces, and there's elements that are probably truthful and accurate. And I go back to this. At one time, the people believed in a geocentric theory of the universe. And even then, astronomers could plot the paths of stars and planets, even though that was inaccurate. A heliocentric shifts it, makes it better, but it didn't mean the geocentric got everything wrong. Yeah. So all I'm saying is I think whenever we start making these statements, we've also got to take into account the broadness of our audience and not merely sound like we're dumping on something entirely without saying there may be a little more nuance here than we're recognizing. Yeah.
Well, and we well said.
Never sacrifice.
That was so well said, because I remember watching it live in 2019. Right. I don't know. Maybe I was a little goofy. I watched the whole thing live on the website. I mean, that 2 days, I might as well have been in Alabama, right?
Exactly.
So there, it's winding down and they get to the resolutions and I'm listening to them like, wait a second, man, I haven't heard about critical theory since I was in graduate school at Missouri State. What are you guys talking about? Oh, wait, we're affirming this? And so I did talk to Adam pretty quickly. I was like, we need to write a resolution to combat this. This is wrong. And we did, and we submitted it in 2019, and it didn't even get to pass the committee. And I asked two of the members of the committee that I knew, I was like, what is the deal with this? Like, it's an important thing. And both of them said, and they were right on with this, nobody here knows what critical theory is but you and a few others. Mm-hmm. Why do we want to denounce it? And I was like, but because we affirmed it.
Yes, because you just said what you said and we affirmed it.
Exactly. And of course, there's a part of me that's sitting there saying, I'll just admit it. In some ways, I wish that the convention would stop doing resolutions. I'm not sure what we're accomplishing.
Yeah.
We make a declaration. But the reality, if you view this as strictly Baptist polity question, all right, we don't send delegates, we send messengers. We don't instruct people from our church if they go how to vote. Okay? That would create a connectionalism. It would say that, well, you do it this way because we have to submit to whatever they say. The fact is, the Southern Baptist Convention, when it meets next week, the year of our Lord 2021, is merely the statement of the messengers at that convention. Now, you say, well, aren't they speaking for the whole SBC? No, they're speaking for that gathered convention at that time. Now, I'm not going to be so foolish to say that doesn't have an impact how we're viewed in the world and those other issues. I just think at this point, the process to me is kind of gummed up. And so I almost would be of the mindset to just drop the resolutions.
Yeah. That's what you're saying there.
You're taking a chunk of business time. And now we're going to take another chunk to basically, if not repudiate, come out with a better nuanced resolution, one hopes, in the summer. I guess if you don't pass resolutions, you don't often have to go back and recant.
Yeah. Oh, that's right on. Well, and of course, it makes me think about the first Southern Baptist resolution about abortion, where we said, hey, it's a good, and I think it was 74. It's funny, I just read something about it today. It was 74, 75, where we basically said, abortion's fine if it's rape. It's fine if there's something wrong with the fetus. And I believe that was even the terminology in the resolution.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that was the position of the Christian Life Commission, what was the antecedent to the ERLC today. Foy Valentine actually, who headed that up, took a pro-choice position. So the CLC, the old Christian Life Commission, was actually put the Southern Baptist Convention on the map as being pro-choice. Abortion was seen as a Roman Catholic issue. It was, and Adam, your reference to Christian Manifesto, the fact is it was Schaeffer, I think, that had as much impact as anybody on raising the Protestant conscience about the issue of abortion.
Oh, yeah, especially in that book, yeah.
Well, Doug, we want to be really good with your time, and we so appreciate you coming on, but could you maybe give us, with the time that you have left, don't let us push you over your time limit. I told you about 30 minutes, and we've taken more than 30 minutes already. But
brother, I'd set aside an hour if need be, so we're good.
Good. Well, tell me a little bit, as we go in, what would you hope that we actually accomplish? You've been an active part of the Southern Baptist Convention, your entire ministry that God has called you to. Hopefully, there are many years left of you being a Southern Baptist. I've told individuals in my church, if they get things wrong, it's not the end of the world. There's always course correction. And so if looking at it in a hopeful way, what would you hope that we resolve here? You've touched base on a few of those things, but if you put it into a few bullet points.
I think the first thing is there needs to be a clarification on CRT, critical race theory. We stepped in it 2 years ago. We need to clean up the mess.
Yeah.
We need a much clearer declaration where we see that coming from. I do wish that there were some nuance in how we dealt with our brothers and sisters, black pastors, black churches. Say, I would love, talk about dreams. If Vodi Bakum recovers, which I pray God that he will, I would love, if somebody would host a conference where Vodi Bakum and say Thabiti Onyebuile were the two key speakers, and then talk about CRT and their understanding as Christian brothers, theologians. Here's why we take different positions, and have a Q&A. Have the chance for the guy that didn't speak to interact and ask questions. I don't mean necessarily a debate format, but something where those of us who are here wrestling and trying to struggle through it could hear the discussion. I wonder when it's all said and done, we might come out and say, you know what, guys, we may not be as far apart as we think we are. We need to be a little more judicious.
Well, and that's such a big problem when it comes to social media interactions.
Yes.
And that is, it's changed our minds. We have been used by the medium of social media. It has changed the way we think. It has changed. And if you don't believe me, all you have to do is read generational trends. You know why alcohol use, marijuana use, and preteen pregnancy and teenage pregnancy have all went down. Because everything happens in the media world. I mean, my kids don't go and hang out on Friday nights with other kids. They don't even hardly have kids come over and spend the night. Because they're just going to talk online. They're just going to they're just going to, I don't know, whatever medium they're using, right? But they're going to chat, right? And that's how they're going to do it.
It changed everything. And that's, see the other thing, and there's nothing to do for this, but one of the things I lament with social media as it relates to the convention is, okay, in the 80s, you had to put skin in the game to have influence.
Yeah.
In other words, you had to have enough money to get stuff printed, to get it mailed, to develop a mailing list. If you wanted to talk to people, you actually had to get on a plane or get in a car and go.
Yeah.
Okay. Today, social media doesn't cost you anything. And it doesn't matter if you're an ignoramus. You can be heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that's harsh, but I've heard far too many twits online to characterize it any other way. I just want to say, when I see some of the arguments, it just makes me, honestly, it makes me furious. I want to reach through and grab people, shake them, and say, now, let's talk about how language works, and let's talk about how an argument works. You've just leapt from a logical argument to an ad hominem attack. I can get on and say, yeah, you're ugly and your mother dressed funny. That doesn't answer the question. Can we not interact with each other civilly, straightforwardly? Apparently not. So I hope that would come out of the Southwest Convention. I think there ought to be there's going to have to be some way to get some better transparency. Okay, Russell Moore. Overall, I thought Russ Moore did a brilliant job leading the ERLC. He was pro-life unapologetically. He was pro-adoption. He did the right things when it came to the state. Calling for morals and ethics, I found all that exceptional. He gets in trouble because he makes a comment about basically, the whole never Trump thing and ticked a bunch of people off. Well, okay. Should Russ have talked about that? Probably not as the head of the ERLC. But I'd give him a pass on that. I'm sitting here in my own congregation watching people struggle over who to vote for in the last election because they find the previous president so morally reprehensible. And I just think that, I get that there's a struggle, but it just feels like there's a bit of a fundamentalist pushback. I think there's a good old boys network out there that's going to protect one another no matter what. I think it is a shame that we have not created some kind of reporting capacity for the Southern Baptist Convention when it comes to churches who have had instances of sexual abuse that has not been properly addressed or the persons involved held properly accountable. Now, I get there's all sorts of problems legally. There are certain things you cannot disclose. But there have been an awful lot of predators who have managed to keep on in a predation posture because we've not had a better system.
Yeah.
Oh, right on. I think that that's really well said. And that is one of the things that I wrestle with when it comes to how our cooperative program dollars are being spent. I do agree with some of the more, I have no problem saying what I would say the fundamentalist wing, right, who say that people like Mueller are not conservative enough, right, that they're liberal. I agree with the idea of being transparent with the way that our funds are being used and how they're being allocated. I mean, I'm Southern Baptist for a reason, and I believe in the cooperative program. Heck, I've read One Sacred Effort, right? And so puts me in a good category, I think.
Yeah.
And so I think, my grandmother was a career missionary with the IMB, so I have a real love for it. That was something growing up like, oh man, you should be a missionary. I mean, I still remember the poster. You can win them all to Christ when you give to the cooperative program, sat in the back of our little Southern Baptist church. And I grew up hearing the word cooperative program, home mission board, seminary, those are all things, and they're so, so vital. But if we're giving someone so much money, and then the next thing you know, they turn around and say, well, I'm done, there's a real problem with the way that we're dealing with that. And then here we are, and I do agree with the statement. Now we're paying for Dr. Moore to not be the president of the ERLC for the next 6 months. That's hard for me to tell my little church, hey guys, by the way, it's really important that we continue to give to the cooperative program, knowing, but at the same time, I'm like, hey, I think we're doing really good things at our seminaries. I think that there is some awesome things with church revitalization. I'm so grateful that they did, I think, mess up with some of the ways that they dealt with the expansion of the North American Mission Board. But at the same time, you can't always get that strategy right. I don't think it was intentionally done. It cost my dad all kinds of money because he was still getting stuff.
But you see, what you're doing here, David, what I'm hearing from you, what you guys are saying to me sounds like, how about a little bit of generosity in people's motives and what's on their minds? Okay, am I a little concerned about some of the things I've heard come out of the mouths of some of the guys in the seminary? RT. Yeah, I am. But I'm still not convinced the trustee system is so broken that the trustees can't deal with it. I also know that when you're trying to administer an institution as large as, say, the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, there's a lot of considerations there, legally, morally, ethically. There's a lot of stuff going on. So I tend to take more of, there's a reason we call them trustees. We are trusting them to deal with this. Now, if it becomes apparent that's not being done, okay, let's act. But I am concerned about the so-called conservative Baptist network. Yeah. I'm concerned. I don't know Mike Stone, probably a good fellow. As far as I know, he is a good fellow. But I'm nervous about some of the folks that I have seen behind him. And even if he's elected, the convention will survive this. At least that's my assessment at the moment. But I think if we don't find a way to work with each other, if we can't find a way for the Calvinists and the non-Calvinists to coexist, if we can't find a way to talk about these dangerous critical theories in intelligent, winsome, but strongly convictional, clear ways, and if we don't find a way to kind of deal with this good old boy network, that's my concern. I always remind myself the SBC is a parachurch organization, and parachurch organizations never survive long term. Yeah, the Lord promised the church would make it. That's right, not the SBC.
Yeah. I understand that. Yeah. And I think a lot of people, cause I can talk that way to some people and they definitely find that concerning. It's the same thing with like America. If like, I say even like, if America becomes an enemy of Jesus Christ, what is Christ doing right now? Ruling and reigning, putting all things underneath his feet. All his enemies become a footstool. And if America does become a footstool, we as Christians should be like, yeah, like we're okay with that. If America becomes an enemy, the idea of America, whatever it is, and however God disposes of it, we should be okay with it. So even if we are committed to, as a convention that's labeled Southern Baptist Convention and to a Baptist faith and message and all that kind of stuff, we should also be willing to let it go. Yes. If it becomes an enemy, because we can definitely become enemies ourselves. Yeah.
If that's the main, and I'm not, please understand, I benefit from this myself. Yeah. I'm not looking for its demise.
Exactly.
But I do think that we have lost a lot of folks, say sub 40, because we've not addressed some issues we should have, and certainly not addressed them well.
Yeah. And we're, again, from 1985, it's a whole generation. We're looking at 40 years from the last time that it was heavily attended and voted and had something. So, the Southern Baptist Convention didn't meet last year. And so, what happened with that, is we still have a lot of people going like, why is J.D. Greear still president? There's so many rules. I don't know what you think about that and like how you'd think you'd resolve that, but that's a whole, like another show.
that could be a whole other show pretty easily, I suspect.
Yeah. I would say this, and I know we're kind of coming to a close with Dr. Greear. I was really excited when he got elected. I thought that his Who's Your One campaign was outstanding. But outside of that, man, I think, and it's easy for me to be an armchair quarterback, right? But when I think about what is going to be the defining piece in the last few years, it will be what happened in 2019 when they voted to affirm that resolution. Yeah. And that's going to create, because here's what's going to happen in my mind. It's going to be repealed like right away. First thing's going to happen is they're not going to want to seat the Saddleback messengers. There's going to be a big uproar about that. Right. Then it is repeal Resolution 9. That will pass. And then Southern Baptists are white nationalist.
Yeah. And that I hate to even think about that. I think you're right. But I think we have always struggled to live past our heritage on that. Unfortunately, our history shouts that. So, what was the first one you're talking about before the repealing the Saddleback thing?
Yeah.
I'll just say this briefly. If Southern Baptists don't have a clear conversation about the meaning of the terms ordination and pastor and minister and separating, that's where we've gotten ourselves in trouble, as I see it, over the issue of women. If you use the model most churches do now, where it goes back to kind of the business model where you've got the CEO is the pastor, the deacons are the board, and then the CEO brings on whatever staff he wants, and the terms get loosey-goosey. What's a pastor, what's not a pastor, and what does that even mean? Because we got away from concepts of elders leading and deacons, and I'm a committed Congregationalist, but because we don't have a biblical model, as I see in a lot of our churches, we've created some of our own grief.
Yeah.
If I had a woman in my church that was excellent with children's ministry, and we wanted her to run that, I don't see that as a problem. I wouldn't call her pastor.
Yeah.
Yeah. That term has a meaning that I don't think is applicable here. But because we've not defined terms well, I think that's part of the reason we're having the upheaval we are over the issue of Saddleback and others.
Yeah. So this goes back to, inerrancy back in the day. And so we're seeing these things crop up like that. You have to have inerrancy, and then you make it the authority, right? And then you get all your terms and definitions from Scripture, which we haven't done. So that's
it's not enough to believe in inerrancy if you don't believe in sufficiency.
Yeah, amen. And that's, and Body Bacham has talked about that. That's why CRT is such a big deal. because it does hit the sufficiency of Scripture. So, I hope that, if there's any sort of conservative resurgence, again, not the big F fundamentalist, just reacting to stop something, but like we do, I have no problem with getting back to the fundamentals. We need to get back to the necessity and authority and inspiration and inerrancy and all that kind of stuff, and sufficiency being the key. That would be the next target to solidify, because I looked in the Baptist Faith and Message, and I understand its generalness, but like there sufficiency's in there, but I think it can, since it's oozing with inerrancy now in the 2000, I think a generation later, I think we can beef up that sufficiency language without really tromping on anybody's toes. But I think that's a necessary next step in that understanding of what Baptists believe about the Scriptures. So,
yeah, right on.
So, yeah.
Well, Doug, next week at this time, I will be at the Founders Conference, probably at the Abolitionist table. I don't know how much of the Founders Conference I'm going to get, but I'll be hanging out with Bill Askell, so, that'll be
absolutely good. We'll tell Bill I said hello.
I will. I will be sure
We've met. It's been quite some time ago. He may recall that.
I really appreciate all
thank you so
that
much.
you do in the Missouri Baptist Convention. Thank you for your example here as a Southern Baptist pastor, as one who does have, I believe, a very biblical view of the office of pastor. I love that you are an inerrantist. I need to send you a copy of my book, by the way.
Yes, you do. I wouldn't argue for a moment.
I will be sure to
I'll
do
have
such
to,
a thing.
since he's just like right that direction from me right now, I might just have to drive one over and, maybe get some boudin or something with you.
That could be done.
Let us give you a copy. 3 times on, I think we can give you a copy of the book.
Yeah. Well, we don't have any golden jackets for you to wear.
That looks wrong on my side.
Oh man. Well, thank you so much. And, I just want to thank you again, just to let the audience know, I go to Redeemer Church here in Springfield, and this is a man that is has been involved in many ministries and ministers that are part of Redeemer. A lot of just, I guess you could say the Acts 29 folks, can always point to Doug here. And so he's an awesome guy, been described as like his brain is a sponge. And just to be around you and just to listen to what you've been through, what and then just the compassion that you have. So I personally thank you. Redeemer has a great relationship with Boulevard, and if you're looking for the gospel and a gospel community, even though I'd like to be with you at Redeemer, Boulevard's another great congregation to definitely be a part. And we're still working together. It's really awesome because there's a Redeemer sticker on the back of a Boulevard bus right now. So
right, there it is.
So we're in cahoots and everything. But yeah, I just want to let people that listen here know, if you're in Springfield and you're in need of a church family, I can definitely highly recommend Boulevard, and the sitting under the teaching and the leadership. It's not just Doug there; it's the whole leadership. You've worked hard on eldership and all that stuff over the years, and from the people that I've met, wonderful crew of leaders, and just wanted to make sure that people that are listening here hear about your ministry there, and if they want to check you out and become a part of the family. That's definitely a high recommend from as me, whoever I am. So,
thank you. That's very kind.
We're grateful, Doug, and hope that you continue to preach the gospel here in Springfield for many years ahead. So,
yeah,
always nice to say, talk to one of my dad's college friends. So.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Always a small world, so it's awesome. But yeah, so we have taken up the hour anyway,
yes.
So thank you for the extra time that we didn't know that we were going to get today. And so with that said, this is the Tag You're It podcast. I'm Ray Ray.
I'm Dave.
And I'm Doug.
And Soli
Deo.
Gloria.